Hey guys, my name is Sean,
My name is Vinay.
and we're Versus Football.
Versus Football is a podcast run by two friends who have a lifelong love of football, and we saw a lot of sports talk radio and sports talk TV, and we felt that if they could do it, why can't we? We have been studying the game for as long as we can remember, and we just wanted to share our knowledge and our thoughts with you guys.
So, first and foremost, we're going to be starting with the different divisions that we want to analyze ahead of the 2021 NFL season. So, the first division that we're going to be taking a closer look at is the AFC East. And we're going to be starting with the New York Jets and progressively move to teams that have less and less needs as we continue our podcast series. So, we're going to be talking about the Jets. So the funny thing is, we actually recorded this podcast about 2 or 3 weeks ago, back when Sam Darnold was the QB for the New York Jets. Now, what happened a few days back, I believe 5, 6 days ago?
5, 6 days.
Yeah. He was traded to the Carolina Panthers for a sixth rounder this year and a second and fifth next year, I believe.
Second and fifth.
Yeah. So that's what happened. And now we know who's going to be picked with, or at least what position is going to be addressed with the number 2 overall pick. We initially said that, or at least I did, I don't want to speak for Vinay, that they would go for an O-lineman, probably Penny Sewell, because of how highly touted he is coming out of college, and the fact that other O-line picks would probably have been overdrafted at second overall, especially guys like Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw, or Elijah Vera Tucker. But seeing that they don't have a quarterback at the moment, I think what the argument is going to be is who they pick at quarterback. So we know they're going to pick a quarterback. Vinay, do you have any thoughts as to who will be replacing Sam Darnold in New York?
So the odds-on favorite right now is Zach Wilson, and it's not hard to see why.
Just one clarification: he was actually traded. Darnold was traded to the Panthers for a second and fourth next year, as well as a sixth this year. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So the odds-on favorite to be the next starting quarterback for the New York Jets is Zach Wilson, and it's really not hard to see why. He's very explosive. He can run really well. He's not a Lamar Jackson type runner, but he can move well enough outside of the pocket to move the chains. He can make off-platform throws consistently. He's willing to throw contested catches, and he can throw his receivers open. So there's a lot to love about Zach Wilson, although there should still be a little bit of thought that Justin Fields out of Ohio State could also be picked number 2, because Justin Fields also has a lot of these traits. He has a very good arm, although Wilson probably has a better arm than Fields. Fields is also extraordinarily accurate, but Fields has a higher body of work than Wilson. A lot of Wilson's hype came off of the 2020 season, and a big knock on Wilson is that he played quote-unquote subpar competition, whereas Fields went to Ohio State and so had to play Big Ten competition. Another argument is that Fields has the right personality to be able to withstand the New York market, just because it is so cutthroat and so demanding.
Right.
That you need a certain type of personality to handle being a starting quarterback in a city like New York. And the closest thing to having to play for a city like New York is playing for a school like Ohio State, where the demands are so high.
Right.
Regardless of actual team performance, New York Giants fans and New York Jets fans have high hopes for the team and are very demanding and can be fickle at times.
Right, and in addition to that, I think what really struck me about Justin Fields is how composed he is. Not just on the field, he obviously makes really good throws. I think in the college national championship semifinal game against Clemson, he made a couple really good deep throws. I remember one he made to Olave. I forget his first name,
Chris Olave.
Chris Olave was a very good wide receiver from Ohio State. Made a couple catches in very tight coverage with a relatively collapsing pocket. Like he had guys all around him. He was pretty much milliseconds away from being tackled. Made a couple really good throws. I think what really struck me is after that game, he was asked a bunch of times about, people were doubting you, Clemson, they have Trevor Lawrence, consensus first overall pick. They didn't say that part, but like we all knew what they meant when they were talking about Trevor Lawrence. Everybody expected Clemson to make their second, their, two in a row, two college football national championships in a row. Last year they lost to LSU. And he just said, no comment. I'm not really going to get into that. He said it so calmly and so confidently. Like that really struck me in a really good way. And I just thought, why is he falling in draft boards? Like for Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's a fantastic talent. He's very accurate. Had a 33-3 touchdown interception ratio this past year. He had like a 73.5 completion percentage. He broke Steve Young's record at BYU. Great stuff. I just think like late risers on draft boards rarely pan out, or even if they do, I would much rather go with the proven commodity in Justin Fields as opposed to someone who's considered more of a flashy prospect. Because Wilson had a lot of flashy plays throughout his college career against, like you said, opponents that might not be considered high caliber. I mean, they lost to Coastal Carolina. Like, who's to Coastal Carolina? I mean, even Rex Ryan said that. Not that I agree with Rex Ryan a lot, but like that's something I kind of do. Like there were a couple questionable games where he had a couple bad reads. Relied on his athleticism, I think a little too much. Although I think ironically he had less rushing yards than Fields. I think Fields is a lot better in terms of his judgment, even though he is faster. I mean, his 40 time is nuts. It's like 4.44. So it's like he's very athletic. I just like his composure and the fact that Ohio State, that's another thing. He was asked, people were doubting Ohio State because they barely played any games this past college football season, and they still made the top four in the college football championship run. And people were knocking on them. I mean, Dabo Swinney, the Clemson head coach, basically kept on, poking jibes at them for barely having played college football at all. That's why they were undefeated. But they ended up beating Clemson because they were just a better team, regardless of how much they played. And Justin Fields dealing with the pressure of being the quarterback at Ohio State, dealing with the pressure of facing criticism that they didn't really play all that much, and they still managed to win, and he still managed to keep his calm. I think that really spoke volumes about his character. I would still go for him, safer pick, better suited for the New York market, and he's been there up in the draft board of a lot of people for months on end, like way before even Zach Wilson entered the conversation.
Yeah. Another thing about Fields before we move on, Sean was talking about how well he played against Clemson with a collapsing pocket. He also played really well with a collapsing lung effectively. He took a massive hit by James Skalski towards the end of the second quarter and managed to play through that injury. The play after he came back in, he threw a touchdown, and he threw a lot of deep passes with that injured rib. And so his physical toughness is off the charts. He's able to take a hit and keep on going, which is going to be important for playing for the New York Jets in 2021 because you could have a lot of athleticism. You could have all the athleticism in the world, but if an offensive line does not perform up to par, if there are still holes on that offensive line, you're going to wind up on the ground a lot. Sam Darnold, people don't realize how athletic Sam Darnold is, and even he was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the league in 2020 and in 2019. So you kind of need to have that toughness, that strength, and not saying that Zach Wilson doesn't have it, but Justin Fields is extraordinarily tough, probably the toughest quarterback in the class.
Right, and he's proven that as well. So once again, the proven commodity. He'll be facing a much, much better offensive system under Mike LaFleur, who succeeded with guys like Nick Mullins, C.J. Beathard, Jimmy Garoppolo, and San Fran. So Justin Fields, I think, will adapt to that very easy quarterback-friendly system a lot better than any system Gase or Loggins ran, before. Even in Chicago, they had a very, very bad, bottom five offense in the league. So yeah, with that, we're going to move on to the edge position, which we thought was their next biggest need. Well, actually, let's go with O-line first.
Yeah, O-line. So we initially had offensive line as their biggest need. Sean had them taking Sewell at 2. My personal preference would be to move off the number 2 pick, sell it for a king's ransom,
Right.
and then try and grab Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. But with the trade of Sam Darnold, it's very clear that they're using their number 2 overall pick on a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're going to add offensive line, it's going to be through pick 23. And offensive line is extraordinarily important. As previously mentioned, Sam Darnold was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the league. He was second only to Carson Wentz this season, and that's not really a good place to be. So, and in the last podcast, we admitted that even if they did decide to move on to Darnold, they would need to make sure they fortify the offensive line. They do have Mekhi Becton, who is proving to be one of the best left tackles in the league already. He did allow 7 total sacks in 2020, but that number is sure to go down as he gets used to the NFL style of play and the quality of NFL edge rushers. He already showed a lot of improvement from being a fairly good left tackle towards the beginning of the year to being almost elite left tackle by the end. So they have an anchor on the left side, but almost every other position on the line could use an upgrade. You could see them try to use the 23rd overall pick for someone like Tevin Jenkins, if he's available at 23. Maybe Vera Tucker, who can play all over the line and is almost like Slater. They have similar builds, and they're both technically very good. It's just that Slater has far better tape than Vera Tucker, especially Slater's game versus Chase Young back in 2019.
Yeah.
But Vera Tucker is not to be slept on. Some mock drafts have him fallen all the way out of the first round, and I do not agree with that at all. He is definitely going to go in the first round. The question is, how does the offensive line position shape up? Because if there are a few taken at the top, there's a chance that Vera Tucker might go high as well to somewhere like Los Angeles, the Chargers. Or if there isn't a rush on offensive tackles at the beginning, and the Chargers go with somebody like Darisaw, or the Vikings go with someone like Darisaw, who is a proven left tackle, who is a prototypical, just put him at left tackle or put him at right tackle and they'll play that. You don't really need to move them inside to guard. They're best suited to play left tackle or right tackle. Somebody like Vera Tucker might fall to the Jets at 23. So,
yeah, like going off of that, I think because the Jets have so many subpar linemen, apart from their first round pick from 2020, Mekhi Becton, who's very solid at left tackle, they need to address center. Connor McGovern has been pretty lackluster, but they have kept him around. He was one of those players that a bunch of the Jets media and fan base thought would be let go with the incoming of Robert Saleh, but they did keep a lot of guys. Connor McGovern was one of them. So maybe they're thinking of improving upon him as center. And I think they do need one of those guys who are very versatile at guard or tackle, kind of like a Rashawn Slater type guy. But I highly doubt he'll be there for 23. And I don't anticipate the Jets trading up to take a lineman. I think they'll use their first round picks this year and next year where they are and not give up any additional draft capital. They also kept around Alex Lewis. They got Dan Feeney from the Chargers, I believe. And Dan Feeney was pretty good, but they let him go because he wasn't getting the job done quite as much. And they ended up getting Corey Linsley at center just to shore up the interior a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how well Feeney does. They also kept Clark and Van Roten around, and I don't exactly know how they'll be used because they had very limited snaps. Van Roten had more than Cameron Clark. But once again, like it's going to take a while before they can develop into an elite unit in the interior. But also, they weren't coached very well, and the schemes that were run by, Dowell Loggins and Adam Gase were very counterproductive because you had like very, very, very few outside runs. I think only about 20 to 25% of all runs by the Jets by Frank Gore were outside runs. I would say it's even lower from the games I watched. They had him running between the tackles and not trusting Mekhi Becton to shore up the outside from the left. And they kept trying to run him between guys like McGovern and Van Roten or Alex Lewis through the A gaps, and then between the tackles and the guards, which just wasn't working over and over. And they tried the same thing with Le'Veon. That's not the kind of guy he is. He needs very open running lanes. Even if you run him down the middle, you have to have elite offensive linemen to create those gaps that open up with time that he had in Pittsburgh and DeCastro, Villanueva, Pouncey. So it's very hard to gauge how good the line is right now. They definitely need an upgrade on the interior. I think a guy like Vera Tucker, if he does fall to 23, that'll be like a very good pick, because I think at 23 he's undervalued. Darisaw, same thing. I think between those two, if either one are open, should be taken at 23 in order to shore up the interior of the offensive line, not just for their future quarterback that they'll take it to inadvertently, but also their running game, of which they can draft in the second round because they have a high second round pick as well. They can get ETN, Sermon, Najee Harris. I don't know if he'll go earlier, but bunch of options at running back that you could switch around with committee. They also have Ty Johnson, who's very explosive, both on the outside and between the tackles. So good line can ensure good quarterback play and running back play, basically killing two birds with one stone.
So I basically I don't have much to add to that. I think we can move on to the next thing. I believe we used to have edge as their highest need, but they did sign Carl Lawson from the Bengals in the offseason, so that should be a very good addition. They could also use one of their later round picks to get someone like maybe a Patrick Jones II out of Pitt, who showed out at the Senior Bowl. He might fall to round 3 even, so they might be able to get somebody like that there, but that's no longer as essential of a need as it used to be pre-Carl Lawson.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes wide receiver or pass catcher, at least, or some kind of pass catcher, their next biggest need. They did go out and sign Corey Davis,
right,
which is a good signing, although there are no guarantees. The resurgence of Corey Davis' career came with the resurgence of Ryan Tannehill's career, so we don't know how much of that is tied to Ryan Tannehill, and how much of it was actually Corey Davis improving. But for right now, they're probably going to roll with the assumption that it is Corey Davis. What they could use is a solid tight end. My dark horse pick for their 23rd spot pre-Sam Darnold trade was someone like Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State, the tight end. He is obviously considered tight end 2 compared to Kyle Pitts, who is by far tight end 1 and might be one of the best players in this entire draft class, regardless of position.
Probably best offensive player.
Best offensive player.
Or player in general.
Yeah,
right?
That's probably the best player in general. Just flat out amazing. But Freiermuth in almost any other year would be tight end 1 by a wide margin. He is a great run blocker, which the Jets are desperately in need of. They need somebody who can block well. And he's also a great route runner. Think almost like baby Kittle. And I think somebody like LaFleur, who had Kittle in San Francisco, would want a similar kind of tight end to fit in his new system. And Freiermuth fits that mold better than almost anyone I can think of, both in the draft and that was available in free agency.
Yeah, he's a very good pick for the first round as well. My only thing is, I don't know if they'd want to address two skill players with their first 2 picks, because they're going QB at 2. So they might address the trench or defense with their 23rd. So with Freiermuth, I feel like if he does fall, maybe if other teams are very quarterback, line, defense heavy in the first round, and he falls to the second round, of which the Jets have, I think, the
34th pick.
Yeah, 34th pick in the draft. Then I think they can get Freiermuth at 34. I can see him falling there, and then they'll address 2 skill position players within the top 34, as well as either a trench or defense player with 23. They have a lot of draft capital there, but I definitely think he's tight end 2 coming out of college.
Sorry, just to add, I think really tight end 2 doesn't sell it. It's tight end 1 and tight end 1A with Pitts and Freiermuth respectively, because you can't really compare Pitts to almost anyone in this draft class. Pitts is like if Megatron played tight end,
Yeah,
technically.
exactly.
So you really can't compare somebody like Freiermuth. You can't compare somebody like Jamar Chase to Pitts, because Pitts is just so unique that to compare others to him would not be accurate in any sense.
Right, exactly. No, I agree. They did also sign Keelan Cole this offseason. Can't really gauge that move as much right now. Corey Davis was a lot easier to gauge considering he did have more targets, made a couple great contested catches early on in his career, especially 2017 in the playoffs against the Patriots. I remember made a really nice one-handed catch against them. Ever since then, he's been all right. I feel like A.J. Brown's taken a lot of his targets from him. He became wide receiver 2 there. I would say he's wide receiver 1 here. And Keelan Cole would probably be a WR3 behind Mims if they can develop Mims well, because he's a great contested catch guy as well. They have a very, very deep wide receiver depth right now. I'm pretty sure they're going to cut a lot of guys at wide receiver. Right now they have 1, 2, 3, 4. They have 13 right now before training camp. So they're going to cut a lot of receivers. Amongst the guys they won't cut, I'm predicting Keelan Cole, Jamison Crowder as a veteran. He was arguably the best guy that they had at wide receiver last season. Isn't saying much, but it's true. He was best by a long margin. Corey Davis, they just signed. Doxson's coming off of the season. He decided to opt out because of COVID. So let's see how he does. They have Denzel Mims that they drafted with their second-round pick last year. And then they have a couple other guys, Josh Malone, Jaleel Scott, Jeff Smith, Vincent Smith. Not too sure if they'll make it to the final roster, but they have a lot of options. And we'll just see how they'll fit in LaFleur's system, where I anticipate a lot of short passes and a lot of screens. Not a lot of deep plays that take 10 seconds to develop like Gase used to run. I think whoever they draft will have a very good time with even these wide receivers. So the next position that we're going to be addressing is running back. The thing with running back is I'm a believer that RB by committee is the best way to go unless you want a generational talent like Saquon or Josh Jacobs or even what Derrick Henry's turned out to be at their position. You don't usually get a lot of guys like that at running back. It's not a run-first league anymore like it was early 90s and before. So what I would suggest is, obviously they're not going to have Frank Gore back. Great career, but not made for the Jets in the long run or even short run, to be honest. Ty Johnson, I think, is their most promising running back prospect. He played really well. I think he had the first 100-yard season. He had a 104-yard rushing game against the Raiders that they would have won if it weren't for the Jets. Zero blitz, right? That got Greg Williams fired. So if they hadn't done that, then it would have been in a winning effort. And that was their first one since Isaiah Crowell's 219-yard game against the Broncos back in 2018. So it's been a long, long time. And it's not just the fact that he put up great numbers, but he did it in a really, really good way because he's very fast, he's very agile, he's got good stamina, runs between and outside the tackles very effectively. LaMichael Pirine, I don't think, is nearly as fast as Ty Johnson. They picked him up from the Lions, I believe, in 2019. I really like him as a running back, and he's very cheap as well. So if you can keep him, make him your RB1 right now, or maybe draft a guy in the second round, even in the third round. There's a bunch of late round running back prospects that you can get that are very undervalued, and you can have like a 2 running back tandem behind a solid line. And he's a very good slot receiver as well, which is required, I think, of running backs increasingly in this day and age of like the spread offense in the NFL, where the more receivers, the better.
Yeah. One of my favorites, you talk about a guy who can line up in the slot, line up as a receiver. Demetric Felton out of UCLA will probably fall to third round, fourth round, maybe even fifth round if the Jets get lucky. Although obviously they take at the top of all those rounds, so that kind of increases their odds to get him at every round. But Demetric Felton came out of high school as a wide receiver, switched to running back at UCLA, then went to the Senior Bowl as a wide receiver and dominated the Senior Bowl as a wide receiver, dominated the one-on-ones, but is still declaring for the draft as a running back. He's a very good running back. Obviously, not to the standard of Etienne or Najee Harris, or even the two coming out of North Carolina, Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. I hope I did not get their names mixed up. But Felton can run the ball, but he is also very good route runner, like a very good route runner for a receiver, but he plays running back. So that is somebody they may want to add. I feel like LaFleur would like that kind of tool in his arsenal to have a Demetric Felton. So I will throw his name out a lot just because he is so talented, and very few teams really have that kind of running back that can almost act like a fifth receiver when they have when they're keeping a running back in.
It's true.
So
yeah, I could definitely see Demetric Felton. That's the guy's name that you mentioned earlier. I think he's a very good late round pick that can be a very versatile weapon as a running back. And they could go running back by committee with Josh Adams, Ty Johnson, and Demetric Felton. I don't anticipate LaMichael Pirine getting a whole lot of snaps. Maybe not even Josh Adams, but there's a lot of guys that you can try in the backfield at the running back position. And they even got Tevin Coleman. I forgot that they got Tevin Coleman in the past free agency. And I think he's a very solid guy. He's a veteran, so he can impart a lot of his knowledge and experience playing with the Falcons and even the Niners and a bunch of other teams in the past years, and give it to their current running back core. So he's a good addition, very good slot receiver as well, decent running back. So I like that free agency signing for a bunch of reasons. So I think at running back, and a lot of it also obviously depends on the O-line and how well they can block if you want to go for the pure run game, in addition to how well they line up in the slot. So the penultimate need that we think the Jets have is at cornerback. And the cornerback market is still relatively wide open. There are a couple guys there. I think the two names that jump out immediately to me are Richard Sherman, lots of experience, veteran guy. In my opinion, as a completely unbiased Seahawks fan, future Hall of Famer, and he's willing to go into a system where his former defensive coordinator at the Niners, Robert Saleh, will be head coach at. So the defense is going to be based on what they ran in San Fran. They have a lot of cap space. They can pick him up. And Richard Sherman, not only is he versatile and very intuitive, and he can ad-lib in almost any defense that he feels comfortable in, but he's very experienced in the defense that Robert Saleh ran in San Fran, where I think one of the main things he did was he took his defensive backs, whether or not they played cornerback and safety, and kind of switched them around. And that's something that he's done with Sherman a lot, either man on man or line up as a safety, usually in cover 1 or cover 2 schemes. And that's another scheme where Richard Sherman really thrived in Saleh's system. So I could definitely see him going there as a veteran and a very skilled one at that. Another name in terms of someone I believe who's a little younger and who still has, I think, a little more left in the tank in terms of his youth would be Casey Hayward. He was released, I believe, from the Los Angeles Chargers. And he's another guy who's, I believe, a past Pro Bowler. He's 31 years old, but he's still very, very versatile. He made the Pro Bowl and second team All-Pro twice, both in 2016 and 17. He would also be a decent pickup, not probably as acquainted with Saleh's defense as Richard Sherman was the past 3 years, really 4 years, but decently a very good cornerback.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Obviously, Richard Sherman is a great veteran presence, and it's not just you as an unbiased Seahawks fan, as a Broncos fan who have to watch Richard Sherman crush my team in the Super Bowl.
Right.
It's clear that he is qualified to be in the Hall of Fame. Obviously, member of the All-Decade team for the 2010s. A great leader to have. There is a lot of, I would argue, racially charged narratives about Richard Sherman being almost cancerous in a locker room, having like a loud mouth, but that's all very, very, biased.
Right. Like, he's the exact opposite, in my opinion. From my opinion, like, from my experience as a Seahawks fan, trust me, there are a lot of Seahawks fans that don't see him in a good light because of the way he left, and also because he left around the time a lot of the LOB members were leaving. But hey, he didn't flip off the front office and coaching staff like that other guy did, whose name shall not be mentioned. But he left. I think he was a class act for us. He's a class act for the Niners. Sucks that we played him 2 times a year for the past 4 years. Kind of crazy that's been 4 years already. But yeah, like, he was a fantastic player. He still is a fantastic player, in my opinion. And he just has a chip on his shoulder. I know it's a very cliche thing to say about any player, but he legitimately does. Taken in the middle of the 5th round, came in, proved himself, had one outburst at the end of the NFC Championship game for the 2013 season, but that doesn't define who he is. If anything, it proves how competitive he can be when pushed to the edge. And he's an extremely competitive, fantastic player. He made the Pro Bowl in 2018, the season they went to 2019, I believe. The season they went to the Super Bowl and played the Chiefs, lost, but he made, I think, 2nd-team All-Pro that season. That's how good he was. So I definitely think he has a lot left in the tank, especially in a system that he will be acquainted to under Robert Saleh in New York. And corner is another position I think is highly likely that they will address at 23, because in terms of edge, they got Carl Lawson. They have one of the best interior D-lines in the league. I'd say a top 10 D-line in terms of pressures, in terms of hurries, pass rush win rates. So I think in terms of all of that, they're one of the best in the league. They got Carl Lawson. I don't think they'll be addressing 2 skill players in the 1st round, like I said before. They could get O-line, but I think between O-line and secondary, they might be more inclined towards going with cornerback in a draft where I think the top 3 cornerbacks are 3 of the best prospects coming out of college that we've seen in a while. Caleb Farley, Patrick Surtain, and J.C. Horn. Now, the thing is, they could all easily be taken before 23. J.C. Horn is now rising up draft boards. Lots of people are predicting, maybe even the Panthers to take him, like, in the top 10. Surtain is predicted to go to the Cowboys. One of them were predicted to go to the Broncos before the signing of Kyle Fuller from the Bears, but they do have very high draft value.
Yeah. Oddly enough, though, it feels like Caleb Farley, who you mentioned, who was often mocked to the Broncos at number 9, because there is a worry he may not be ready in time for training camp because he was coming off of the surgery. That he has been dropping off of draft boards.
Right.
So if the Jets get really, really lucky and they get somebody like Caleb Farley at 23, I highly believe that they would jump on a prospect like that just because of how talented he is. Now, it's likely that the 3rd cornerback could be taken by the Arizona Cardinals at number 16. But should one of those cornerbacks fall to New York, they should definitely seriously consider taking him.
Right. Yeah, the cornerback market is very up in the air. We don't know if they're going to draft because they are in an ideal position to draft one of the cornerbacks. Greg Newsome is another name out of Northwestern. Aaron Robinson coming out of UCF. They're pretty big physical corners as well. I don't know if they're first-round talents, though.
Yeah.
And if either one of those, like aforementioned 3, Horn, Farley, or Surtain, aren't available at 23, probably not Surtain, he's probably going to the Cowboys, maybe not even Horn. But if, let's say, Farley's available and they can fit him into their system, as a defensive back, he'll be like an indispensable asset because they don't have a very strong cornerback or just defensive back core in general. They did draft a couple guys last season. Bryce Hall was amongst one of their more promising cornerbacks. He made a couple really good plays against the Rams, their first win of 2 in the 2020 season. He picked off Jared Goff once, and he made a couple really good tackles in pass defenses. I think he's developed into a decent corner after his first year. Javelin Guidry, didn't see much of him. Very strong tackler, and he can be a very physical cornerback. Didn't really do much of a note in pass coverage like his counterpart Bryce Hall, but he's decent. Ashton Davis, I think he has a long way to go. The fans in New York have been torn with regards to his production last season. But we'll see in training camp what they do with Ashton Davis. A lot of people actually predicted Saleh and Co to cut him after he became head coach.
Which I feel like is a little bit ridiculous. Ashton Davis is, after all, that was his rookie year.
Right.
And so he is extraordinarily promising. There wasn't like they used a very premium pick on him. He was a third round pickup, so he could prove to be good value. They do have a very, very good safety in Marcus May. It was extraordinarily underrated.
Right. They actually franchised him, and he had a couple picks. He had the butt interception against the Dolphins. He picked off this Russell Wilson even in the end zone, covering DK Metcalf, one of the most prolific wide receivers in the 2020 season. They also added LaMarcus Joyner from the Raiders, I believe he was in last season. So they have a very strong safety core. They have Joyner, who's been to the Super Bowl with the Rams. He was a very integral part in them even getting there. Very safe, sort of very physical guy. Alongside Marcus May, who's a very, very good free safety, can move very freely around the field, and is a very good ball hawk, in my opinion, for the price that you're paying for him. And that's the thing. Like, I think cornerback's a bigger need. They have a bunch of young guys, but if they can put them into one system where they can thrive and be put into a place to succeed, I think they can very closely model the Bucs secondary, because they have a lot of guys that are, that won the Super Bowl in large part because of the DB performance. You had Sean Murphy Bunting, Antoine Winfield was a rookie, a couple other guys I can't remember right now, but a very, very young secondary that got the job done when it mattered. And I think the Jets can model their secondary after that, even potentially with a 23rd overall selection at the cornerback position. I think they're pretty solid at safety. And the final need, in our opinion, that for the Jets going into the 2021 season is linebacker. And this can be construed as either outside or inside linebacker. They have a very strong D-line, especially at the interior. They're just lacking a pass rush that they actually addressed with Carl Lawson. But other than that, in terms of their linebackers, they haven't had a whole lot to be happy about as of late. I would say the best linebacker that they signed in the past couple of years was C.J. Mosley in 2019, I believe, and he sat out 2020. I think he sat out 2019 for some sort of injury, or he was out for that season. And 2020 he sat out for COVID-related reasons. So his return will be very interesting indeed. And I think in a Saleh-based system with a lot more legitimacy than a Gase-based team, he's more likely to give it his all, just mentor the youngsters. And I also think that he is a perennial Pro Bowl. Before he missed these last two seasons, people often forget how good he was. He was like consistently making the Pro Bowl, making an All-Pro team pretty much every other year with the Ravens, and he made them into a stout defensive unit throughout the 2010s. And now he's come to the Jets. He's in a very, very, I think, aggressive, Saleh, player-centric defense, where linebackers thrive. I mean, just look at Fred Warner back in San Fran. I think C.J. Mosley is obviously not as young as Fred Warner, but he's extremely experienced, and he can thrive in a Saleh system. Apart from him, there are a couple of young guys. So Bryce Huff was all right, nothing like spectacular at outside linebacker. They signed Jared Davis at middle linebacker. We'll see how well he does. That is considered to be one of the most important positions in the field, kind of surveying the quarterback and making crucial tackles throughout the middle of the field, stopping short runs. It's a very important part in building up a very good run defense. Blake Cashman, he was like in and out this past season, but the team is pretty high on him, especially from training camp. He is one of the more versatile pass rushers. But I think they do have a need, especially at inside linebacker, that they can address in the draft.
Yeah, you basically hit the nail on the head there. So with that, really, I think that kind of concludes our Jets episode. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the draft and to see how they do with Robert Saleh, their new coach. And obviously to see how the Joe Douglas era fares. He inherited a pretty bad team in 2019 and he was handed a quarterback already. And now that he has a chance to build up the team in the image he wants, it's going to be intriguing to see what he does. Does he fare better than most previous Jets general managers, or does he continue the trend? For the sake and for the sanity of Jets fans all over our state, I really hope he builds something special.
And if he does, then he'll be remembered very fondly, because even if you have one, pretty lukewarm season, the New York media will treat you, well, in a very divided way. They'll chastise you to no end, but they can also deify you, because that's kind of how this media works. But regardless, Joe Douglas does have a proven track record with the organizations he's been at in Philadelphia, building a Super Bowl champion there. Before that, he was at Baltimore. He helped build a Super Bowl champion there in 2012. So it'll be interesting to see how he completely overhauls the Jets and how he works with Robert Saleh and his team to build up this Jets team into what they once were under even as late as Rex Ryan a decade ago. So it'll be very interesting to see how they approach the rest of this offseason and especially the draft. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back with another episode on the subsequent teams.